All right, ServSafe review. Hey guys, it's Chris Hill here. Grab your ServSafe book, take some notes, or write down some page numbers and such for the final ServSafe exam. Good luck. Like I've said before, it's an exam where they're really trying to make sure that you know the information that's present in the book, which means that sometimes they'll be asking questions where they'll be tricking you up in ways that you might not expect. So first thing I'd say is make sure you read all the questions thoroughly and make sure that you know what they're asking the question. Sometimes they'll add superfluous information that you don't need. So my suggestion is make sure that you know what they're asking, make sure that you're only applying the relevant information necessary. Sometimes they'll mention things with high-risk populations, but the actual question doesn't involve an answer where that's even important to take into consideration. So just keep those kinds of things in mind. So when you look at the ServSafe exam, the book, as you're reviewing, make sure that as you're reviewing, there's kind of 5 main themes throughout the book, and make sure that you have a good grasp on all of these, and they pop up throughout, but there's obviously different kind of, I guess, chapters of each. Purchasing food from safe vendors. So that would be not approved and reputable suppliers, they say in the ServSafe book. Not cooking food properly. And this is all on page 1.5. Failing to cook food, holding food at incorrect temperatures. So holding food, that doesn't just mean hot holding, which we know is above 135, but it's also cold holding. So making sure refrigeration is proper, and also making sure that storage and all that kind of stuff. Not sanitizing properly, and then poor personal hygiene. And a lot of times the questions, they're basically trying to answer one of these five points on 1.5. I'm just going to kind of go through the book pretty quickly with some important things. Now, assuming you've read the book, I just want to kind of touch on some things that seem to pop up on most of the tests. Obviously, knowing major terms like cross-contamination, knowing what TCS food is, right? Time and temperature controlled for safety. Sometimes I've even seen that question asked before, what does TCS stand for? Knowing what the 3 high-risk populations are, the elderly, infants, and compromised immune systems. Let's see here. We're going to move on to chapter 2 now. Now, chapter 2 is a lot of, it's all of the biological contaminants. So food can be contaminated in 3 different ways, right? Biological, chemical, and physical. So the physical is obviously things like your hair or a fingernail, a piece of a glove or a Band-Aid, a bone, something that actually naturally occurs in the food. Chemical contaminants could be metallic poisoning from a pan. It can also be too strong of sanitizer solution, or you didn't properly clean your pan and there's a bunch of leftover soap or something like that. But biological, that's all the bacteria and the viruses, parasites, fungi, all that good stuff. There's a bunch of them in here, and there's probably a total of maybe 20 or 30 of them. I would say if you know the big 6, which is the 6 big bacteria, plus maybe another 6 or so, you're probably going to be safe. Know the kind of main symptoms: diarrhea, vomiting, fever, nausea, abdominal cramps, and jaundice. The big 6, know those: Shigella, E. coli, Salmonella typhi, non-typhoidal salmonella, and then the 2 viruses. Those first 4 are bacteria, then 2 viruses, hepatitis A, and the norovirus. But bacteria, no Fat Tom. Some specifics of Fat Tom you might need to know is bacteria prefer a water level of 0.85 to 1. So this water, what do they call it? It's the water level. I'm sorry, water activity. So water is 1, bone dry, like in the desert, 0. So bacteria prefer like a 0.85 to 1 for water activity. And then they also, on the pH scale, so from alkaline to acidic, they prefer 7.5 to 4.6. So like slightly acidic. And let's see here. We're going to jump over. Know at least what spores are. They can essentially hibernate, and oftentimes found in dirt. And they can hibernate and then come back to life. But what's kind of scary about spores is they cannot be killed with temperature. So they can't be like cooked off. They can't be frozen off. So if there's a question around spores, it would probably be something along the lines of, how do you make sure that your food doesn't have spores? And the only way to make sure of that is to buy it from approved and reputable suppliers. That way, the soil that's being used, or the ingredients being produced in, have been tested, and we know that they're good to go. All right. So the ones here on the bacteria that you should probably definitely know, 2.10 on the bottom, Listeria. Listeria is often associated with like deli meats, ready-to-eat foods, unpasteurized dairy. I would say the thing that is most unique about it is if women that are pregnant have eat something that has Listeria, then they can have a miscarriage. So if you see anything involving a miscarriage, it would be Listeria. I'll do the ones that are not the big 6 first, and then I'll jump into the big 6 here. Then there's botulism. I think we've all at least heard of botulism. That's often associated with canning, not properly canning oil mixtures and things like that, or vegetables. Definitely know a little bit about botulism, and then I guess maybe staph. Basically, the staph it's about 30 letters long. The very last bacteria, the second last bacteria, I guess. There's a picture of a tuna salad sandwich in the book, and that's basically staph infection. Let's see here. And then the one that's related to seafood. So if you've ever eaten an oyster and gotten sick, you probably had Vibrio. So that comes from oysters from contaminated water. So what's great is oysters are delicious, but the problem is they filter the water, and they basically ingest the toxins or the bacteria that's in the water, and then cleans the water throughout. That's basically what they like a nature's way of having like a filter in the system. The problem is now we eat that oyster and we get the bacteria as well. So that's Vibrio. Now the big 6, the 4 bacteria. Just I guess just the best thing to do is probably read over all these. E. coli, that primarily comes from ground beef, but it can come. It can be present in vegetables, which we've seen a lot here recently, because of maybe manure that was used for vegetables, or maybe water runoff, things like that. The biggest differentiator between E. coli and the others is bloody stools, and you can have kidney failure. Non-typhoidal salmonella, that's the salmonella that we associate with chicken. Salmonella typhi, basically typhoid fever. And then Shigella. Shigella, I try and reiterate throughout class, is basically the one that is most associated with flies. Yuck. Now the 2 viruses. That's the 4 bacteria. The 2 viruses. Hep A. Hep A is the only one that has a vaccine. So if you have any questions about vaccines, Hep A. Norovirus is very, very spreadable. They're both through human to human contact, but Hep A often with people that already have compromised immune systems. Now parasites. You should know at least a little bit about parasites. I would say probably Anisakis, the one that's kind of gross, where if you consume it, you end up coughing up worms. But at least kind of look over the other ones as well. Seafood toxins. All right. The one that I seem to always see on the test is the cigatoxin, which is the toxin. It's in seafood or in fish, I guess rather. That is common in coral reef fish, so like snapper and amberjack and barracuda, things like that. Then there's the 3 toxins that are the PSP, the NSP, and the ASP, which is neurotoxic, the paralytic, and then the amnesic. Oftentimes you'll see those ASP, NSP, and PSP. Moving on to chapter 3. Know the alert system. Basically, that's the way to make sure that our food is not contaminated deliberately. Know a little bit about that. Allergies. Know the big 8 allergies. There's always a couple questions on specific types of foods and what those allergies would be. Cross-contact is the transfer. So cross-contamination, by definition, is the transfer of a pathogen from one surface to another. Cross-contact is the transfer of an allergy protein from one surface to another. So it's using the same tongs to grab something off the grill as you are using for shellfish. So definitely the difference between cross-connection or cross-contact and cross-contamination. Geez, it's been a long day. I'm tired. Let's see here. That's the big things in chapter 3. Chapter 4 is about food handlers contaminating food. Know how to properly wash your hands. Know what your hand washing sink should consist of. Know that hand antiseptics, like antibacterial, like foaming things or hand gels, cannot be used in place of hand washing. You basically have to wash your hands first and then use the hand gel or that stuff if you want. You can only wear, jewelry-wise, you can only wear a wedding band, nothing else on your hands. Know a little bit about wounds and boils and things like that. Basically, if you have an open wound, you have to have something, an impermeable membrane to basically keep it from dripping blood or your juices all over the place. Ready-to-eat food cannot be touched with your bare hands. You can only touch food with your bare hands if it's going to be cooked to the proper internal temperature. So you can grab a raw chicken breast and then throw it on the grill, as long as you cook that to obviously to 165 like we're supposed to. But then obviously you don't want to wash your hands afterwards. Gloves, gloves and single-use gloves. Make sure that you wash your hands before putting them on. Change them in between tasks. Every 4 hours, you need to change your gloves out. Make sure you have a couple of different sizes for different people. Make sure you have a latex alternative in case somebody's allergic to latex. What else? Reporting health issues. Obviously, everybody needs to know when to report health issues. If any of your if your staff has the big six, the four bacteria, the two virus, then they cannot be at work. If they have what the hell? I'm blanking on yellowing of skin. Jaundice. Geez. If they have jaundice, they cannot come back to work for 7 days with a doctor's note. For the other symptoms, if they have the other bacteria, virus, then they need to be symptom free for at least 24 hours before they can return to work. Chapter 5. The flow of food and introduction. All right, flow of food. Know the 9 steps in the flow of food. Basically, it's finding a supplier. So it's purchasing, receiving, storing, cooking. Then it's holding, cooling, reheating, and then service. A lot of times we're not going to have these 2 or 3 of these steps in the middle. We're just going to cook it and serve it. But we need to know how to properly cool, properly reheat, all that kind of stuff. Make sure you know that. Know, obviously, the temperature danger zone. There's a good graphic here on 5.2. 41 to 135 is temperature danger zone. That means all food needs to be either really cold or really hot. And the zone from not 135 but 125 to 70, pathogens grow the fastest. And then so we need to, if we're cooling food, we need to get any food from 125 down to 70 in 2 hours, and then we have 4 more hours to get that from 70 down to 41 degrees or below. Know your thermometers. Immersion thermometer for liquids, a surface probe for a flat top or a grill or something like that. I know at least how to, well, it's good to know for your kitchen use anyway, but how to properly calibrate a thermometer every day or when you drop it. Hopefully the glass doesn't crack if you're old school. Know what a TTI is, a time temperature indicator. That's when you get a case of whatever coming from Cisco, and it's got a little built-in thermometer gauge that's irreversible. So if your food is in the danger zone, it'll alert you, and you can then reject your shipment. All right, moving on to chapter 6. All right, let's see here. So chapter 6 is receiving. No receiving guidelines. You should have the same person there to receive it every time. You want to make sure you check the invoice. You want to make sure there's no signs of pests or watermarks or ice crystals on frozen stuff. They're going to tell you to check the temperature of everything. Most of us grab a case of something and know it's cold and put it in the fridge. First in, first out. Basically, all right, so everything, this is page 6.6, a really good graphic. Everything needs to be 41 degrees or below upon receiving, unless otherwise specified. So shellfish, shucked shellfish, shell eggs, and what am I missing here? And milk. Those are all 45 degrees or below for receiving. Now they have 4 hours to come back down to 41 degrees or below. Everything else TCS food wise, there's a picture up here that just has a bunch of chopped up fruits and vegetables. That includes everything else, the 41 degrees or below. So chicken and all your meats, all your cheeses, things like that. And I'm not sure, I've never ordered hot TCS food, so basically food that needs to stay hot. That's going to need to come in at 135 or above, just like your warm holding it on your steam well. And then frozen food, there's not an actual temperature. It just needs to come in a way that's still frozen, or in a way that keeps it frozen. Um, know what to look for. Know what to look for in terms of rejecting different types of things like fish. If you see like sores or abscess or gray gills, foggy eyes, obviously the smell or slimy touch, and then know what all the meat should look like. If you have cracked muscles and clams, things like that. No mold on cheese unless it's supposed to have it. But definitely look through that stuff. Chapter 7. All right, labeling, just date marking. Obviously so for anything that's not going to be in its original container, there needs to be a label. If it's a TCS food, so anything that you cooked or chopped up, then it needs to. So say you made like a sauce or a soup for service, you basically have 7 days to get to either use it or dispose of it, and that's 7 days from the time of the oldest ingredient. So if you have sausage that you cooked 2 days ago, you have 5 and make that into a soup. You have now 5 more days to make it to use it or sell it. All right, so on 7.7, there's the layout of the refrigerator. How I like to envision it is everything in the refrigerator is going to be based on how long it needs to be cooked for. The stuff that needs to be cooked for the shortest amount of time is me at the top. I'm sorry, not in this amount of time. The lowest temperature. So all vegetables, cheeses, dairy. Is me 135 at the top. If you're cooking, it's me 135, or it could be ready to eat food up there also. Next shelf is me seafood, which is 145. Below that is going to be meats, primal cuts, and steaks, lamb chops, things like that. That's me 145 also. Now, so if you look at it being below the produce and the ready to eat food, if we're above that and some seafood juices with some bacteria dripped onto the produce, and the produce isn't going to be cooked to as high of a temperature, then there could be an opportunity for that food to be contaminated. So even if you have some liquid that comes from the vegetables, hopefully you don't, it drops onto the seafood. You have to cook the seafood longer than the produce, so it shouldn't matter, at least in terms of health standards. So then, all right, so it's produce, seafood, steaks, primal cuts, things like that, and then ground meats. That's all ground meat aside from poultry. So that's beef, lamb, seafood, all that kind of stuff, pork. And then on the very bottom, and that's 155. 155. You have to cook that to 155. Again, because then that's below the 145. So if the stuff above it drips on it, not ideal, but it's not going to hurt anybody because we have to cook that for a longer period of time. And then below that, below the 155 is the 165, which is poultry. So that's whole cuts and ground turkey and chicken. So think about it like that. That's why chicken is at the very bottom, because that needs to be cooked the longest. There's a little table on 7.1 that's pretty good. And we'll move on to chapter 8 here. Chapter 8 is preparation. Prep. You know how to thaw food, the different ways to thaw food. The best way, I think hopefully most of us know, is in a refrigerator. Next best way, under cold water with running water. So it can't be in cold water that's sitting there stagnant. You can also do it in the microwave. If you do it in the microwave, you have to cook it right away because it's bringing the temperature up so fast that it's already kind of in the temperature danger zone. So just go ahead and cook it and make sure that you kill anything that might potentially be there. and then thawing. Yeah, so the microwave, and then you can cook as part of the cooking, as you can thaw as part of the cooking process. And you can also slack, which applies like frozen food. So you take it out of the freezer, let it kind of slowly start to thaw a little bit, and then you throw it in the fryer, and that's good to go as long as it doesn't get above 41 degrees. And there's this is all in 8.4. Obviously, you need to clean and sanitize after each use or after each ingredient. Pulled eggs. Pulled eggs is when you have a bunch of eggs that are you whisk into a big bowl. The problem with pulled eggs is if you have one egg that has some bacteria, then now all the eggs have bacteria, which is the reason why if you have pulled eggs, you have to cook them right away. Or you can store them at 41 degrees or below. We'll talk about HACCP plans in a little bit. The actual temperatures that I referred to a few minutes ago and the times are on 8.11. Really just know that it's 15 seconds for all that stuff, except if you have a big like a roast or something like that, your prime rib, like a lamb, that it needs to be 145 for 4 minutes. Everything else is basically 15 seconds. Also, on the back side of this page is hot tea, 171 degrees, is it? 175, and vegetables, if you're gonna cook them, 135, but no amount of time. I referred to the cooking, the cooling of food, basically taking that food that's holding at 135 and then cooling it down to 41 degrees. You have 6 hours, 2 for that first higher time, then 4 for the next. So properly cooling food, not over stacking the refrigerator, making sure the refrigerator is lined with shelving that's not going to keep the heat. So no aluminum foil on the shelving units, that kind of thing. Chapter 9. Let's see here. Holding for service. Let's see here. All right. So 40 on 9.3. It has there's a couple graphics of half pans of potato salad that's cold and some pasta that's hot, and you're basically gonna have these out, like say for like a picnic or something like that. You can have them out without keeping them cold or hot, but then you have to, for the cold stuff, throw away after 6 hours, and for the hot stuff, throw away after 4 hours. And it has to be labeled properly. So make sure you read over this on 8.3. I think most of this on 9.4, it shows us a bunch of graphics with people being dumb, handling stuff. Serving utensils. Each item needs to have its own serving utensil. And then to just talk about like mobile units and like things like that. They should probably update it with more stuff on food trucks, but maybe that's coming soon. Chapter 10 is probably the hardest for most students to kind of get through, I think, that or the bacteria and virus chapter. This is all about HACCP plans and things of that nature. There's a term, active managerial control, which is basically having a game plan for dealing with things that are going to pop up. And then there's a HACCP plan. I'm not going to go through the 7 steps of HACCP. If you want, find another YouTube video on here, and you can kind of walk you through it a little bit more. But definitely know what a variance is. A variance is when you have a cooking method or something going on in your restaurant that's outside the realm of normal operations. So if you are if you have a sous vide and you're sous videing meats, they take a long time to get out of the temperature danger zone. But you've taken all the oxygen out, so there's not really any room for the oxygen to breathe or for bacteria to breathe. So it can maybe be okay, but you have to talk with the health inspector. They'll come by, you'll show them the hazard plan, and they'll sign off on it. Other examples of that are having a live shellfish tank, because you basically have like like an environment where people like an ecosystem. That's what I was trying to think of. An ecosystem, you have salt water and other things going on. You got to make sure that you're taking care of it properly, because then people are obviously eating these lobsters or whatever else you have in there. Cold pressed juices, that's another one. If you're gonna smoke meat for not for flavor but for curing, there's a whole list of that stuff. Actually, that might even be the next chapter, but we'll continue. Actually, no, here it is. 10.10. Let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and there might be a little bit of stuff towards the end of chapter 10, but HACCP's the biggest thing in the variant stuff. Number 10, or 11 rather, is safe facilities and equipment. So flooring, know what kind of flooring you need in different places. For the kitchen, there needs to be resilient. There's non-porous flooring. So non-porous, obviously meaning that water can't seep through it. So you can't have carpet in your kitchen, thankfully, right? So tile, ceramic, concrete, that kind of thing, vinyl. Other places that are not food or prep areas, you can have pretty much wherever you want. And the reason, obviously, for things like carpet is you can spill stuff and mold can grow, but also bacteria can get stuck in there. Somebody throws up, not good. That's the reason why you can't have same thing. You can have carpets in the bathroom. You can get kind of messy if the toilet overflows. Dry storage, how that kind of stuff. Dry storage, no direct sunlight that can kind of cook things that are in cans. No exposed like pipes that are kind of up against where your items are. They could kind of warm it as well. Make sure there's good circulation. About room temperature. Different sinks obviously are used for different reasons, and they shouldn't be used for anything else. Know the different components of what makes up a sink, or a hand sink rather. You have to have hot and cold potable water, so it has to be drinkable. You have to have a way to dry your hands. You have to have a way to just dispose of paper towels if you have paper towels. Otherwise you have to have like the air dryer. You have to have a sign that says employees must wash hands before return to work, blah, blah, blah. Equipment selection. No, NSF is are the people that certify stuff that's food grade, commercial grade rather. So yeah, you can't bring in your air fryer that's used your house for trying to be healthy and frying chicken for people for the new year, right? It's not made to for the volume. It's not made to work that hard. Let's see here. We'll talk about actually while we're here, thermometers. Plus or minus, so the thermometer you have on your sleeve, degree of accuracy is plus or minus 2 degrees. Plus or minus 2 degrees. Where are we here? This. Your dishwasher, same thing, plus or minus 2 degrees. And plus or minus 3 degrees for your like your low boy stations, your sandwich units, any sort of refrigeration. Plumbing, the most fun part of the whole book, right? This part's so interesting to me because it's definitely outside the realm of what most of us think of for cooking. But plumbing. So before we talked about cross contamination, we talked about cross contact. The third cross is a cross connection, which is when you are contaminating a clean water supply with a dirty water supply. So if you have a hose that's used to maybe spray off like the kitchen, and that's sitting and it's attached to your sink, and that's sitting in your mop bucket, that's not good. Back siphonage or backflow is when it backs up, and that's when that actually happens. Back siphonage is when someone else maybe turns a stronger water unit on somewhere else, and there's a negative pressure that's pulling the air basically from the hose. But if there's not any air, it's pulling that water, that dirty water. So that's back siphonage. The only way to eliminate back siphonage or backflow, and backflow is just kind of the more generic term for it. The only way to eliminate that is by having what is an air gap. Basically, it's the sink with the wires down here and the hose is right here. They're not touching. That in between space is the air gap. Easy enough, right? Now, most restaurants have to have, the other term for this is most restaurants have to have a vacuum breaker, which is basically it's a valve that keeps contaminated water from mixing with the cold or with the clean water. Health inspector can come in, and I'm not sure where this is. It's later on, but the health inspector, if you have a backup, they can come in if you have a sewage issue, and you should probably close anyway. But they can tell you to close because of an imminent health hazard. Basically, something that's they deem to be not something that you should be working in. They can also do that if there's a significant lack of refrigeration, if there's signs of a lot of pests. But we'll talk about that maybe on 14 too. 12 is all about cleaners. So know the different types of cleaners: detergents, degreasers, delimers, and abrasive cleaners. Sanitizing. There's two different types of sanitizing. There's heat sanitizing and there's chemical sanitizing. Most people don't really understand this. But basically, when we sanitize stuff in a 3-compartment sink, like when we have bleach, we have the first sink is 110 degrees. We have the second sink, which is either with just cold water, or we have a hose, a way to kind of rinse off the plate once it goes into the third one, which is then going to be either bleach or quartz, iodine, one of those three. And that's 110 degrees. Now, that 110 degrees doesn't kill any sort of pathogens. The heat's not killing anything there. It's the bleach or the iodine or the quartz that's killing the pathogen. The other way to kill pathogens is through heat, which is why we have the high temperature dishwashers. So know the difference in the two and why we do the two. The final temperature for a high temperature dishwasher needs to be 180 degrees. On page, 12.6 here, it shows you basically the temperatures that the water needs to be. And then here, a couple pages later, on 12.9, talks about the dishwashers. Drying, always let things air dry. And then actually on 12.1 is talking about the 3-compartment sinks. Let's see here. Definitely know proper sanitation stuff. Obviously, it's massively important. So definitely read through some of that. 13, pest control management. Sometimes they'll use acronyms. So IPM, Integrated Pest Management Program. And the other one is a PCO, which is a Pest Control Operator. There's usually not a ton of questions on the test from here. There are a couple that you do need to probably know, though, is cockroaches. The thing that pop up on the test sometimes is can, if there's a lot of cockroaches, I guess it can smell kind of oily. So if it smells oily, you either need to change the fryer or you have a cockroach problem. So oily smell related to cockroaches, and they also can carry Salmonella typhi. So I've seen that question pop up before. Then there's all this stuff on rodents. Then it talks about your pest control operator and making sure you get a good one, all that kind of stuff. And most of us are smart enough to figure that out. Basically all materials, poison stuff should be applied by them, and then they should be kept in the original containers. There also needs to be a SDS, which is a safety data sheet. That's going to make sure that if there's some sort of issue with it, it's ingested for whatever reason, proper measures are taken to make sure that everybody's going to be okay. And that's chapter 13. And 14 is really the kind of last one. There's 15 in the book, but 15 is really more kind of a sum up, and it's more on like training, and I think it's kind of beyond the scope of ServSafe. It's important stuff for sure, but it's not really anything to do with the other stuff in here. And as a result, you don't really see much on the test from it. 14 is about like the regulatory authorities, that kind of stuff. So you have the CDC, you have I start with that. Let's start with the bigger ones first. You have the USDA, you have the FDA. The FDA, all right, the USDA is responsible for meats, all meats across the country, eggs, and dairy. FDA is responsible for everything else. So under everything else includes, like we've seen before, like toothpaste and Cheetos and things like that. Every year the FDA comes out with a food code, and that's essentially their suggestions for the local health departments to put into practice. Now, they're only suggestions. At the end of the day, the local authorities have the right to make the judgment call for what they're going to put into place and not. The reason why it's not set in stone is because certain places have higher calcium in the water, let's say, and they're gonna have to use more bleach sanitizer solution than the average person, or maybe they have a higher altitude and that's going to affect certain things, or they have well water instead of normal water like most of us do. So there's different things that can be different in different places, which is why the FDA says, all right, here's the food code. We think you should probably use this, but use your best judgment. So then you have the local authorities are the ones, obviously, the local regulatory authority. They're the ones that come in and they walk in the front door with the clipboard, and everybody scurries off. And hey, health inspector's here. And everybody throws away the old food or puts labels on things and go grab their hats in the back. And then you have the PHS, which is a public health service, and they basically facilitate the CDC with investigating outbreaks and things of that nature. They kind of help a little bit here and there. And then the CDC is obviously Center for Disease Control. They are the ones that do a lot of the grunt work for a lot of the outbreaks. And that's pretty much it, y'all. That is chapter 14. If anything, in chapter 15, look at 15.3. It's kind of a summation of the book. There's some good questions. If you Google like ServSafe practice test, there's a bunch of stuff online too. But let me know if you have any questions, and good luck with the test. Cheers.